The mare cost $4 from the estate of Dmitry Volkov on a Thursday morning in April of 1933, which was what she cost because she was blind. Nora Voss paid the $4 before the auctioneer had finished explaining the situation to the 6 men standing in Volkov's yard. The situation, as the auctioneer explained it, the mare had been Volkov's prize animal, an Akhal-Teke from Turkmenistan, a breed 3,000 years old and still rare enough in New Mexico that most men in the county had never seen one. She had been blinded 18 months ago when a piece of wire from a broken fence had caught her left eye in the dark, and the right eye had failed from sympathetic inflammation 3 months after that. She was 7 years old. She was in Foal, the auctioneer paused here, by Volkov's stallion, who had been sold first and was already gone to a buyer in Albuquerque who had understood what he was buying and had paid accordingly. The 6 men looked at the mare. She stood at the corral rail with her head slightly raised, ears working the morning air, tracking the sounds of the yard with the patient precision of an animal that has learned to build the world from what it hears rather than what it sees. She was a golden buckskin, the Akhal-Teke's famous metallic sheen apparent even in the early morning shade, her coat catching the low light and returning it transformed, as though the color were generated from inside rather than reflected from outside. She was narrow and long-necked and impossibly elegant, the muscles of her shoulder and hindquarter defined under that luminous skin with a clarity that did not look like something born, but like something carved by a sculptor who had never made a mistake. She looked like a different category of animal from the cow horses and working stock around her. She looked, Nora thought, like something from a story. She was blind, and she was pregnant, and nobody wanted her. Nora paid the $4. Her name was Nora Voss. She was 26 years old and had been running the Voss homestead alone for 19 months, since her father's lungs had sent him to Santa Fe to live with her aunt. 90 acres at the foot of the Sangre de Cristo range, dry grass and cedar and a creek that ran true in spring. 8 quarter horses, a small cattle operation, and a mortgage the bank in Taos had been patient about for 2 years. She had not been planning to buy a horse. She had come to the Volkov dispersal for a saddle and a working mare, gotten both, and was leaving when the auctioneer opened the corral. She had stopped because of the way the mare moved. Blind horses, in her experience, moved with a constant low-level anxiety, the perpetual uncertainty of an animal whose primary survival sense had been taken. This mare moved the way water moves, with the complete confidence of something following its nature without resistance. She walked the corral rail with her ears tracking each sound, her nose reading the air in slow, deliberate sweeps, her feet placed with the unhurried precision of a horse that has memorized the ground under her and trusts the memory. She was, in some quality Nora could not name but recognized immediately, entirely at home in her blindness. Nora had stood at the fence and watched for 5 minutes while the 6 men had their conversation about the liability of a blind brood mare and whether the foal would inherit the eye condition, and what you were supposed to do with an animal that couldn't be worked or ridden and was eating through expensive hay at a premium rate. She had paid the $4. She drove home with the mare in the trailer, speaking to her continuously. Not because the horse understood the words, but because the mare's world was built from sound, and a consistent voice in the trailer was the difference between an animal that traveled calmly and one that arrived damaged. The mare traveled calmly. At the farm, she let Teke stop at the trailer ramp for 30 seconds while the ears moved and the nose worked, building a picture of the new place from what was available. Then the long, measured stride of a horse that has decided this ground is acceptable. She put the mare in the south pasture, put a bell on the water trough, and spoke Teke's name from the same point at the gate every time she entered. By the 3rd day, Teke would walk to her voice. The foal was due in 7 weeks. Nora had written to a horse breeder in Lexington, Kentucky named Frank Alderman, found in a bloodstock journal at the county library, who had responded in 2 weeks with 6 pages of information she had not asked for and prices she had read 4 times. The Akhal-Teke, Alderman wrote, was the oldest domesticated horse breed in continuous existence. In the United States, there were fewer than 30 documented individuals. A purebred Akhal-Teke colt, documented and sound, from known dam and sire, in America in 1933, would be worth, here he named a number. A filly, the same. He had 3 clients who would pay it. He had been looking for a Akhal-Teke breeding stock for 11 years. He wanted to come to New Mexico. It was in the 3rd week of April that Luke Calder stopped at her gate. He was passing the county road with a string of horses heading to Santa Fe, a horse trader by occupation since he was old enough to evaluate a fetlock. 30 years old, black-haired, the true black that reads almost blue in direct sunlight, with dark green eyes, the specific shade that looks almost impossible in a human face. Jaw built for outdoor work, complexion that had been in the New Mexico sun for 30 years, and showed it in the way that looks like character. Broad through the shoulders, moving with the economy of someone for whom every motion has a purpose. He stopped because of Teke. Something in his peripheral vision caught him and pulled his eye to the south pasture, and he brought the gray to a halt and sat for a moment watching what he was seeing. Teke was at the far end of the pasture. She was moving along the fence line in that way she had, not pacing, not anxious, but moving with the deliberate, unhurried authority of an animal entirely at home. The morning light was on her coat, and the metallic sheen was doing what it did, the golden buckskin glowing from inside, the muscle definition visible at this distance, with a clarity that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with architecture. She was the most remarkable horse he had seen in 30 years of looking at horses, and she was moving wrong, and he could not immediately identify why. He sat on the road for 2 minutes before he understood. She was not tracking movement, she was tracking sound. She was blind. He got down from the gray and walked to the gate post, not to the house, to the gate, because a man who knows horses knows that you do not walk to someone's house when it's the horse you've come about, and knocked twice on the post with his knuckle. Nora came out of the barn and walked to the gate with the unhurried assessment of a woman who had been managing her own property long enough that unexpected visitors did not change her pace. Pale gray-blue eyes, the color of early morning sky before the blue arrives, platinum gold hair pinned up with strands loose at her jaw, tall, long-limbed, the capable build of a woman who had been doing physical work since she was old enough to be useful. She looked at him the way she looked at horses, completely, starting with the eyes. She stopped at the gate and waited. "That mare," he told her. "Is she blind?" Nora looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Teke moving along the far fence, then back at him. "Since last year." He looked at the horse, at the coat in the morning light. He had seen Akhal-Tekes twice in his life, once at a private ranch in Virginia, and once at a horse exposition in Denver. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He looked at Nora. She was looking at him with the particular steadiness of a person who has information and is evaluating whether the person in front of them is worth sharing it with. He looked at the pregnancy visible at this distance now that he was looking for it. What's she carrying? Nora was quiet for a moment. The same blood as her, she told him. Purebred. He looked at the mare, at the pregnancy visible even at this distance now that he was looking for it, at the extraordinary animal moving along the fence line as though she owned the ground under her feet, which in a sense she did. She knew every inch of it. He put his hand out. "Luke Calder. I trade horses, Santa Fe to Colorado." "Nora Voss." She shook it. "I know what you do." He looked at her. She had the expression of someone who has done their reading. "Have you written to Alderman in Lexington?" he asked. She had. She had written 3 weeks ago. He absorbed this without showing much of it. Alderman was the right contact, the only contact for this breed in the United States. She had found him on her own, which told him something about how she operated. He looked at Teke one more time. Then he picked up his lead line. "I'll be back through here in 10 days, he told her, heading north again. She looked at him with those gray-blue eyes. She did not say, "Come by if you like," or "You're welcome to stop." She simply held his gaze for a moment and then nodded once, which was, he understood, the same thing. He came back in 10 days through the unlatched gate, she had left it that way, which he understood was deliberate, and walked to the south pasture where Nora was doing the morning check. He stood at the rail and watched the mare in silence. Then he asked 2 questions about the foal's position and the mare's condition, both good, both answered fully. He came back the following week, and the week after that. He never told her what to do with the mare. He came, and he looked, and he asked questions that showed he had been thinking about what she had told him. Once he noticed Teke favoring her left front before Nora had, and mentioned it with the brevity of a man who points at a thing and steps back. Nora checked, found a stone bruise, treated it. The mare was sound within 3 days. Before we find out what Teke's foal brings into the world, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This channel reaches people from all around the world, and we love knowing where these stories land. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. New stories every week. The foal arrived on the 22nd of May at 4 in the morning, in the way of horses that choose the darkest part of the night for the most important things. Nora had been sleeping in the barn for 5 days. She woke to the sound of Teke's breathing changing and was on her feet before she was fully conscious. She had the lantern. She went to the stall. The foal was already on the ground. Teke was on her feet, nosing the newborn with the careful, systematic attention of a mare learning her foal, but not with her eyes. With her nose, with her lips, with the specific, slow, deliberate mapping of an animal building a picture through touch and scent. She worked from the foal's head downward, pausing at each part, and the foal lay still under this attention with the patience of something newly arrived and not yet certain of the protocol. The foal was a colt. He was gold. Not palomino gold, not the dull yellow of a standard buckskin, the specific metallic gold of the Akhal-Teke, the coat that looked lit from inside. And he had it already, at 4 hours old, which was not supposed to be possible in a horse that young, but was visible in the lantern light as clearly as if she were looking at it in full sun. He was long-legged in the way of foals everywhere, and the way of Akhal-Tekes in particular. The breed was built for distance, and the legs showed it from birth. Narrow chest, high withers beginning to assert themselves even now. The muscle definition that would come to define him was already there in the shoulder and the hindquarter, already implying what the adult would become. Teke found the foal's face with her nose and held it there for a long moment. The foal accepted this. Then Teke made a sound, low, specific, different from anything Nora had heard her make before, and the foal answered, and Nora understood that the introduction was complete and that Teke knew her son by his voice now and would not need anything else. Nora sat in the corner of the stall until the foal was nursing, and Teke was calm. Then she went to the house and wrote 2 letters, to Alderman in Lexington and to the Albuquerque buyer for the stallion's documentation, describing the foal with the same precise detail she brought to everything in the ledger. Alderman's reply arrived in 12 days. He was coming to New Mexico, 2nd week of June. Luke Calder arrived the day before Alderman, which was not a coincidence. He came to the gate in the evening, and Nora met him at the pasture rail where the foal, she had named him simply Altan, the Turkic word for gold, because it was the accurate word, and she had been using Volkov's Turkic horse-naming conventions in his honor, was visible in the last of the afternoon light, moving alongside Teke with the early-stage confidence of a foal that has been well mothered from the first hour. Luke stood at the rail and looked at the foal for a long time without speaking. The light was doing what it did to the Akhal-Teke coat, the gold deepening in the late sun, the muscle definition throwing small shadows, the whole animal looking like something rendered in a more deliberate material than ordinary flesh. He turned to look at her. She was already looking at him. She had been watching his face as he watched the foal, because the expression on a horse person's face when they are looking at an extraordinary horse is one of the most honest things you can see in a person's face. And Luke Calder's face, looking at Altan, was the most honest she had seen it. He turned to look at her, and she was already looking at him, and neither of them looked away for a moment. Alderman is going to make you an offer tomorrow, he told her, for both of them, the mare and the foal. She looked at the pasture. Teke moving alongside her son in the last light, the blind mare tracking the foal's sound, always within 1 horse length. She knew. He looked at her. What are you going to do? She looked at Teke moving alongside her son in the last light, the blind mare always within 1 horse length, always oriented toward him. She knew. She had been thinking about it since the foal arrived. He was quiet for a moment. The foal approached the fence and stopped 6 feet back, already showing the Akhal-Teke quality of self-possessed interest, curious but not anxious, evaluating but not fearful. Then you'll need to get the right price for the foal, Luke told her, to compensate for the mare. She looked at him. She had not asked for this information. He was offering it because it was true, and because she needed it, and because that was the kind of man he was, which she had been understanding gradually over 6 weeks of visits. I know the number, she told him. He looked at her. He had the expression she had come to recognize in him, the specific quality of a man encountering something that repeatedly exceeds his expectations and has stopped being surprised by this, but has not stopped noticing. What is it? She told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. That's the right number. We're halfway through this story and we want to know, have you ever seen an Akhal-Teke horse up close? That metallic coat, that impossible elegance, there's nothing else like it in the world. Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your reminder. New stories every week. Frank Alderman arrived the next morning with a veterinarian and a buyer's representative from a Virginia racing operation. He spent 2 hours with the mare and foal, read every document she had assembled, asked 4 questions. Then he made his offer. 2 numbers, the foal alone, then both together. Then he made his offer. 2 numbers, the foal alone, then both together. Nora listened to both. She looked at Teke at the paddock rail, ears tracking the conversation. The foal, not the mare. Alderman looked at her. He looked at Luke, who offered nothing. He looked back at Nora. You understand the mare's value increases every year she's in production. She understood. She also understood that Teke had mapped this farm in the way a blind animal maps a place it has decided is home. The layout of the fences, the location of the water, the sound of the creek, and she was not going to take that from her. The foal, she told him. That's the answer. Alderman nodded once. He named the foal price again, with a small addition that she understood was his acknowledgement that she had negotiated correctly without negotiating. She took the bank draft to Taos the following morning. The mortgage on the Voss homestead had $14,000 remaining. The draft covered it entirely, with enough left over for the North 40 well and the barn roof. She drove home with the deed clear in her hands, free and clear, no debt, for the first time in the property's history, and stopped at the gate of the south pasture and sat with the truck engine off for a while. Teke was at the far end of the pasture, moving along the fence line in that way she had, ears working the morning, feet placed with the unhurried precision of a horse that knows the ground under her. No foal beside her now. But she was not distressed. She had grieved the foal's departure in the way horses grieve, with a day of calling and a day of quiet, and then a settling, as though the accounting had been done, and she had arrived at the correct total. Nora got out of the truck and walked to the pasture gate and called the mare's name. Teke raised her head. Her ears came forward. She stood for a moment while the sound of Nora's voice settled into her picture of the world, and then she walked across the pasture with the same long, strided grace she always had, stopping at the rail, her nose finding Nora's shoulder. Nora put her hand on the mare's neck. The coat was warm from the sun, and the metallic sheen was there in the light, that quality of illumination from within. And she stood there for a while with her hand on the horse, and the mortgage paid, and the land free, and the spring coming down off the Sangre de Cristos with the smell of cedar and distance. Luke came that evening and found her at the south pasture rail. He stood beside her, looking at Teke grazing in the last light. He said, "This land is yours now, entirely." "It always was," she told him. He looked at her. The paper finally caught up with the fact. She looked at Teke. The mare's ears were tracking the conversation, turned toward the two of them the way she turned toward Nora, which was the highest thing Teke offered, and what she had been doing with Luke since the 3rd week of his visits. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, the same quality of attention he had given the mare at the gatepost, complete and patient, and not in any hurry to arrive anywhere because the looking itself was worth something. He told her, "I'd like to keep coming here. Not for the mare," he paused. "For you." She had arrived at her position on this some time ago, in the way she arrived at positions she trusted, through accumulated evidence, evaluated honestly. "You've been coming since April," she pointed out. He almost smiled. "I was working up to it." She looked at Teke, who had walked to the rail and stood with her nose toward them, ears forward, tracking the conversation with the focused interest of a horse who has decided this is the important thing happening now. "Ask the question, then," she told him. He asked it. She said yes, and Teke put her nose against Luke's shoulder in the gesture she reserved for people she had decided were worth keeping. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Leave a comment below. Have you ever kept something that everyone else said had no value and turned out to be exactly right to keep it? Your stories are what makes this community what it is. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll have a new story for you next week. They married in August, quietly. Her aunt from Santa Fe, his brother from Colorado, Reverend Castillo, who had married 3 Voss family members before Nora. She wore her mother's dress. He wore his good jacket and looked at her with the expression he had for extraordinary things. Teke was bred again in September to an Akhal-Teke stallion Luke had spent 4 months locating, a documented animal with a Russian emigre in Arizona, arranged after 2 visits and a letter from Alderman. The second foal arrived the following April, a filly, the same metallic gold, the same impossible elegance visible at 3 days old. Alderman came again in June. There was also a buyer from England that Luke had located through his network, which he had not mentioned until it was useful. She sold the filly to the English buyer at a price larger than the first sale. Their son arrived the spring after the wedding, dark-haired like Luke and with Nora's gray-blue eyes, a child who observed everything, said little, and missed nothing. On a morning in October of 1937, Nora was in the south pasture with Teke, the mare in her 3rd pregnancy, moving through the pasture with the same unhurried authority she had always had, ears tracking the farm's sounds, feet knowing every inch of the ground under them. Nora stood beside the mare with her hand on the warm neck, the metallic coat catching the October light the way it always did, that quality of illumination from within, and thought about a Thursday morning in April of 1933 and $4 and an animal nobody had wanted. She had seen something in that corral that the 6 men had cataloged as liability and could not see past. A horse that had mapped her world from what she could hear and smell and feel under her feet, and had decided this was sufficient, and was moving through it with the grace of an animal entirely at home in its own terms. Luke came through the pasture gate. He came to where she was standing and stood beside her in the October morning, and Teke's ears tracked him, and the mare's nose found his shoulder in the gesture she made for the people she had decided were worth keeping. The land was paid for. The mortgage was gone. The second foal was in England, and the 3rd was coming in March. The account in Taos had a number in it that bore no resemblance to anything possible on a Thursday morning in April of 1933. Luke put his hand over hers on the mare's neck. She said, "She mapped this whole pasture, every inch of it, without being able to see any of it." He said, "You do that." She looked at him. He was looking at the mountains. She looked at the mountains too, the cedars going dark against the gold, the Sangre de Cristos holding their light on the high peaks the way they always did. faithful and indifferent and entirely themselves. She left her hand where it was, under his, on the neck of the horse that had made all of it possible. The horse that had mapped a world she couldn't see and moved through it as though the limitation were simply another kind of knowledge.